Clarity by Dragon. Uh, Chapter 1. Why /thud/thud/thud. As intangible and unstoppable as the wind which coated it, the blade cuts through flesh and bone like a chainsaw through paper and cardboard. Each swing rains crimson across the floors, a tempest unleashed within the unsuspecting compound. A man dressed in light armor swings at the storm with a short sword. He sways around the swing naturally, lazily stabbing the kunai in his left hand at the side of the man's head. There's no power behind the stab, made with minimum effort. It is almost like a child playfully swinging their arms in the free breeze. For all appearances, there should be nowhere near enough force for even the tip of the sharpest knife to do anything more than leave a slight bruise on the side of the man's head. Yet, a sickening squelch, more blood and gore to add to the dialogue. The tip of the kunai sinks into the man's head, coming out the other side like a fleeting thought. With a jerk of his wrist, he vindictively snaps the man's neck for good measure, freeing his weapon and flicking the human stain out of his way. A second man in armor let out a furious cry. It is not one of anger or vengeance or even grief for his fallen comrade. It is the cry of a cornered animal, a trapped rat of prey caged by an overwhelming predator. Faced with the insurmountable, the man swings his sword in a frenzied desperation. Unmoved by the armored man's fear, the ninjato in his right hand traces an arc of black steel at the man. The rat falls, his upper half landing a few feet away from his lower. A sparse moonlight reflects off the edge of the blade. Not a single speck of blood, dirtying the length of tempered steel. Who could sully a soul already galvanized, picking his way carefully as not to step in any of the kerosene flooding the room. They leave this building and move on to the next. There he finds a gathering of 20 men and women, all armed and armored, the same number that had been in the previous building. Weapons nor protection had helped them. Either blue eyes frozen for this task sweep across the group of mercenaries from behind a mask as dark as shadows. You! His arms blurs in the darkness of the night. The kunai is as invisible. It flies across the room with a whispered noise. It buries itself deep into the skull of the man who was about to speak. The man collapses, blood pooling beneath him, while the rest of the mercenaries look to him in horror. Please, we'll give you anything you want, another mercenary says. This one's fear overrides his anger. Why are you doing this? Meh. His voice is surprisingly calm, and he tries to be as uncaring as an imminent hurricane. But the undercurrent of anger is all too obvious to hear. This is not a natural disaster or angry god to be appeased. He is vengeance incarnate. You'd probably be in a pretty bad mood if someone you cared about went missing, wouldn't you? The mercenary eyes widen. Then his head hits the floor, his body following soon after. The realization frozen on the decapitated face. I only need one mouth to talk, he explains, standing over the headless corpse. The rest of the mercenaries back away with horror and fear clouding their expressions. The rest of you? Well, you can help me blow off some steam. Clarity. In another room filled with a platoon of guards, a girl sits calmly on a heatedly placed folding chair. There is nothing to indicate her distress or even status as a prisoner except for the shackles on her wrists and a handful of weapons hovering over her head. He will come for me, you know? She speaks, breaking the tense silence and looking at the only other person sitting in the room. They turn to look at the young girl with a piercing gaze, but her silver eyes, like blades, hold no fear, only determination and sadness. He will come, she repeated, and he's going to kill you. There is no joy with this proclamation, only sadness and this past acceptance at what is to come. What makes you think you're so important to him? In spite of the sorrow with this question came smugness and a wry smirk. She lifts up her hand and pulls away the left shoulder of her kimono. What he sees shocks him. A fox sits on her moon-pale skin with its head pointed towards the sky and its mouth open wide. Within that gaping maw is perched a perfect rose, delicate petals caressed by the bared fangs. Clarity. Now! They stood no chance. It had been an absolute massacre. The only survivor was the woman whom was now fixed in his gaze. The boy didn't have so much as a blonde strand of hair out of place. The only sign he had even been in a fight was the ripped sleeve of his left arm. He tore the scrap of cloth off, revealing a tattoo of a rose opening a silver moonlight. Nestled in its soft embraces of fox. Collapsed on the floor, the woman cowers as if a spectre of death itself stands before her. If only she could be so lucky. The teen crouches before her and removes his mask, the spotless blade on his right hand gleaming with a deadly promise. Where is my wife? The first time they met was in a crowd in a long run. Nothing about it seemed special, neither of them even remembering it until years later, long after they would meet again. She had just witnessed her uncle take down a crook with relative ease. He had just witnessed his sensei take a man's life with no remorse. That was so cool, Uncle Crow, Ruby squealed. She still had trouble with hard sounds. I'm going to do stuff like that when I'm older. Oh really now, the huntsman wondered, looking at his niece. Yeah, I'm going to be like wah and yeah. The child cheered, making fighting noises and doing her best to mime what she had just witnessed. Though his heart was shriveled as his liver, the huntsman chuckled at the parody of his very serious act. Then he noticed the girl had gotten silent. He looked at her, tracing her line of sight to a small ice cream stand, and chuckled once again at her manic attention. Do you want some? Crow asked. The young girl nodded, her head vigorously. All right, I gotta stay here and talk to the police, so just to the stand and back, understand? The peppy child chirped in happiness and nodded again with her seemingly limitless energy. All right, here you go, kid. Crow smiled, handing the girl Leon to get what she wanted. No more than 2 scoops, though, or your father will kill me. She was going to get 3. This was a foregone conclusion. Uh, we don't do this lightly, the man said, looking down at the blonde. I understand, Naruto responded. No, you don't, the man denied airily with his one visible eye. Not yet, anyway, but you will in time. When will that be? The boy asked with cold patience. Depends on the person, the man continued as he wiped the blood off the blade while the two walked out of the alleyway. As made the blade vanish and they blended back into the crowd, the killer in training spied a small stand, decorations as cloying as the treat is peddled. The novelty was impossible to resist. Would you like some? Naruto looked up at his current instructor, but didn't respond. The man chuckled to himself at the display, having expected it here. He handed the boy a Flulian. Be back, he ordered lazily. Naruto hesitated before nodding and heading off towards the stand. The two ended up in line next to each other. Ruby was vibrating in place as she waited her turn, while Naruto stood behind her as still as the sidewalk itself. They were the only 2 children in line without adult supervision, but they both knew they were safe. Her eeriness taking her in that direction, Ruby turned to find the boy behind her. I like your tail, saying the first thing that came to her mind. She was already entranced by it. Watching as it swayed side to side, Naruto looked at the girl, not expecting to hold a conversation with someone he didn't know. I wish I had one, she moaned, still immune to her gushiness. I could use it as a pillow and it would be super soft. As if he might turn invisible by holding still without talking, Naruto just kept staring, but that didn't seem to deter the girl at all. What ice cream do you like? The girl asked, looking for any kind of distraction since she had to wait. Ice cream? The boy blinked, trying to parse out the nonsensical name. It's what you're here for, right? Ruby asked with incredulity creeping into her interrogation. Don't know, I've never had it, Naruto responded, taking her curiosity in stride. What? Ruby nearly screamed, looking as if her world had been destroyed, incredulously giving way to full-blown panic. This is an emergency, she said. We need to get you some stat. Too perplexed at the colorful child his own age, Naruto had no resource but to blink again. Don't worry, the girl declared. It'd be the second bestest thing you ever tested. What's what's the first? Naruto asked with the first hint of investment as he was swept up in the strange girl's skewed world. Cookies. Cookies? Have you never had those either? Somehow she seemed even more devastated than the first time, and Naruto was made to wonder just how it was physically possible to hold such emotion. He got ready to respond, but was stopped when he was pushed from behind. Distracted, he fell to the ground and dropped the paper money that was blown away by the wind a moment later. Are you okay? Ruby asked in concern, helping the boy up. The boy didn't respond as he watched the cash float away. That was all your money? Ruby asked. Naruto nodded, looking somewhat dejected. He wouldn't be able to taste the treat after it had been so hyped up. But that was life sometimes, as the elder would tell him back home. You just moved forward. I'm sorry, Ruby said with as much moroseness as she knew how. Upon realizing it was her turn, she got ready to walk up to the counter, but paused and gave Naruto a second look. She seemed to arrive at a decision about something known only to her child mind and nodded without another word. She grabbed Naruto by the hand and pulled him to the stand with her. Two ice creams, please, Ruby ordered with a big smile. What flavors, kid? The man at the stand asked. Ruby looked over at Naruto. Two vanillas. The girl with the braided hair preened. A moment later, she was holding two white-capped cones and handed one to a somewhat surprised Naruto. There you go. Why? Staggered, he let go of the blank look he had been giving her the entire time and adopted one of confusion. Because you look sad, Ruby said, and I don't want you to be sad. Thank you, Naruto said earnestly, unsure what else to say or do. He didn't understand what this was, but what she had done and what he was feeling. Ruby, come on. Ah, my uncle, she said, not noticing the change she had imparted. I gotta go now. Hope you enjoy your ice cream. Naruto nodded, realizing with her uncle's voice that he had been gone much longer than he planned. Debating only for a second, he gave a small wave. Then the two ran off in different directions, one towards the blue and red lights, the warm multicolor of friends and family, the other back into the monochrome world where everything eventually is consumed by darkness. Further down the road, and still basking in the sun and the elation, Ruby Rose watched as the headless Nevermore's body fell into the foggy abyss with a certain surrealism. She honestly couldn't believe her plan worked. By all accounts, it shouldn't have worked. How had it worked? Who cared? It worked. Bonus, she and her partner were on better terms now, and when they met, oh, today was looking to be a great day. Nothing could throw her off, save for the man that she saw come out of the forest with panic stricken across his face. She had not expected that at all. I need help. More than panic, the man was terrified and didn't care who it was that heard his plea. "What are you doing here?" Ruby asked, the man's frantic energy rekindling her fight or flight response. "How are you here?" "I don't know." The man stuttered with disbelief at his own ignorance. "Everything's a blur." "We can take you to Beacon, and the teachers will know what to do," Ruby reassured both the man and herself. The man smiled, and Ruby was quick to mime it. A few minutes later, the other freshmen had joined her, and together they all made their way back to campus. The distance was far shorter than before their triumphs over the Grim, and together with that act they arrived on with ease, despite the man's disconcerting arrival. All the while they probed the man with questions, and he answered them as best he could. This proved harder than the short hike back to campus, as he didn't seem reassured by their credentials and kept slowing them down by glancing over his shoulder. "Well, suppose the first days could be weirder." Yang chuckled, unconcerned for the man's paranoid behavior nor their prior inconveniences, while the other took solace in this easy statement. Pyra and Blake suddenly became more aware of their surroundings. Perhaps there was substance to the man's caginess. Someone or something was out there watching them. "Thank you for your help, young lady." Coincidentally, by this time the man had been immured with his fear enough to properly thank the people going out of their way to help him. "It's not a problem," she smiled in all confidence. Today had been a good day after all. It all went south quickly, but to Ruby everything had been in slow motion. Even then, she nor anyone else was able to react in time as the man's throat split open. He reached for his snake haphazardly, but to no avail. The floodgates already having opened and never to be shut. What had been done could not be undone. What had been seen never to be unseen. Ruby stood stock still while her eyes traced the wound to the blade, and the blade to the hand, and to the arm, and then the back masked for space. It was Vulpin and Lyran already decorated with crimson streaks, but she didn't see this instant in, instancy. Instead, looking them dead in the eye, where blue met silver, one a cloudy horizon brimming with too much emotions, the other an icy blue tundra devoid of anything but for a flicker of recognition that met in the middle like lightning. Then it was gone, and Ruby blinked once as the cold, wet reality set in. One minute she was escorting a man to Beacon after her entrance exam, the next she was watching him bleed out in front of her, all because of the person she was staring at, though they didn't stay long under her gaze before the scythe-wielding girl could so much as let out a word. They were moving. They bolted into the forest, fleeing the scene of the crime. It was only when he began moving did the others react. As they were before, Pyra and Blake were the first to respond as they thoroughly chased after the killer. While their determination was set on bringing the killer to justice, Yang ran over to Ruby as she was her main priority. "Ruby, are you okay?" the blonde girl demanded, looking over her sister, who remained unresponsive. "Speak to me, sis." He's dead," Ruby thought. "He's dead." Her eyes drifted in the direction that Blake and Pyra had run off. Why? She was gone, leaving only a trail of petals as she sought an answer.